March 28th, 1945. Germany. The smell is the first thing that hits you. It isn't the smell of gunpowder or the metallic tang of blood. It is the sickening, sweet smell of burning rubber and roasting flesh. On a muddy hill just outside the town of Hammelburg, a massacre has just ended. The scene looks like a graveyard of American armor. Dozens of Sherman tanks, half-tracks, and jeeps are scattered across the landscape, burning furiously. Their hulls are twisted, their turrets blown clean off. But look closer. German soldiers are walking through the wreckage, not with fear, but with curiosity. They are looting the bodies of American soldiers. They are stripping watches, boots, and cigarettes from the dead. There is something wrong with this picture. The war is supposed to be ending. The Third Reich is collapsing. The Allied victory is inevitable. So why in God's name, is there a destroyed American task force lying dead 60 miles deep behind enemy lines? Why are these 300 men lying here, completely surrounded, cut off from all support, in a place they had no strategic business being? If you check the pockets of the dead commander, you won't just find orders from the army. You might find the invisible fingerprints of a crime. These men didn't die for a hill. They didn't die for a town. They didn't die to end the war. They walked into a trap. But it wasn't a trap set by Adolf Hitler. It was a trap set by their own general. They were sacrificed on the altar of one man's ego. This is the story of the only time George S. Patton became the villain. Welcome to WW2 Survival. Today we are opening the darkest file in General Patton's career, the Hammelburg Raid, also known as Task Force Baum. We usually tell stories of survival here. But today, we tell a story of betrayal. To understand how this tragedy happened, we have to look at the date, March 1945. The Allies have crossed the Rhine. The end of Nazi Germany is weeks, maybe days away. The logic of the battlefield had shifted from attack at all costs to let's all get home alive. But inside General Patton's headquarters, the mood was different. Patton was restless. He was looking at a map, tapping Mo's finger on a specific location. Auflage 13B, a prisoner of war camp near Hammelburg. Officially, Patton told his staff he worried the retreating Germans would execute the American prisoners. He claimed it was a humanitarian mission. But there was a secret he wasn't telling his superiors. He didn't tell General Eisenhower. He didn't tell General Bradley. The secret was a single name, Lieutenant Colonel John Waters. John Waters was an American officer captured in North Africa. He was currently being held at Auflage 13B. He also happened to be George Patton's son-in-law. Patton was terrified that his daughter would be widowed before the war ended. His love for his family was blinding him to his duty as a commander. He decided to launch a rescue mission, but he couldn't send an entire division. That would raise too many questions from Eisenhower. So he decided to send a raiding party, a small, fast, sacrificial force. He needed a volunteer to lead it, or rather, he needed a scapegoat. Enter Captain Abraham Baum. Baum was a battle-hardened veteran, tough as nails, with an instinct for survival. When he was summoned to Patton's headquarters, he expected a standard briefing. What he got was a suicide note. Patton looked Baum in the eye and gave him the order, "I want you to go to Hammelburg, break through the German line, drive 60 miles into enemy territory, liberate the camp, and come back." Baum did the math in his head instantly. 60 miles? That's 120 miles round trip, through territory swarming with retreating German panzer divisions. And his force, just 300 men? 16 tanks, 28 half-tracks. Baum looked at the map. It was a suicide mission. It was like trying to punch a hole in a hornet's nest with a needle. Baum asked for more men. Patton refused. "Stealth is your armor," Patton said. Baum asked for air support. Patton said he couldn't guarantee it. The young captain realized something was wrong. This wasn't a military operation. This was a gamble. But in the Army, you don't say no to a four-star general, especially not George Patton. On the night of March 26, Task Force Baum rolled out. They weren't just driving into German territory. They were driving into a trap of ego. Patton had set the bait, but his own men were the ones on the hook. As the column disappeared into the darkness, Patton reportedly wrote a letter to his wife Beatrice. I sent a column to get John, but I hope they make it. He knew the odds. He sent them anyway. The journey to Hammelburg was pure carnage. Task Force Baum fought their way through town after town. They were shooting at everything that moved. They lost tanks to Panzerfausts, bazookas. They lost men to snipers. They were bleeding oil and blood with every mile. But Baum was a brilliant commander. Through sheer grit and tactical violence, he forced his column forward. Against all odds, they reached Oflag 13B. Imagine the scene. The American prisoners, starving and gaunt, see Sherman tanks smashing through the barbed wire fences. They cheer. They weep. They think the entire Third Army has arrived to save them. But then, the dust settles. They see only a handful of battered tanks. Captain Baum climbs out, his face black with soot. He asks the question that seals the fate of the mission. He doesn't ask how many prisoners are here or are there wounded. He asks, where is Colonel Waters? The realization hit the men like a physical blow. There were 1,500 American officers in that camp, but Task Force Baum only had room to carry back maybe 200 men on their tanks. The mission wasn't to save them, it was to save him. The symbol of this betrayal was the moment John Waters was found. He was wounded, shot by a German guard during the confusion. He couldn't be moved. The prize Patton had sacrificed 300 men for was stuck in the camp. Now the trap snapped shut. The Germans had woken up. They realized this wasn't a full invasion. It was a tiny, isolated force. They surrounded Hammelburg with everything they had: Tiger tanks, Hetzer tank destroyers, thousands of infantry. Captain Baum and his men were no longer rescuers. They were rats in a barrel. The retreat was a massacre. Running on fumes with no ammo left, Task Force Baum tried to fight their way back home. But the Germans were waiting. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. On a place marked on the map as Hill 427, the end came. German Hetzer tank destroyers, hidden in the tree line, picked off the American Shermans one by one. Boom, boom, boom. There was no air support. Patton had promised it, but the weather, or perhaps the secrecy of the mission, kept the skies empty. Captain Baum ordered his men to scatter. Every man for himself, came the final order. They abandoned their air vehicles. They ran into the woods. Baum himself was shot in the leg, then captured. Of the 300 men who went on the mission, 9 were killed in action. 32 were wounded. The rest were captured. Every single tank, every single jeep, every single half-track was destroyed or captured. Task Force Baum ceased to exist. The secret mission had achieved nothing. Waters was still a prisoner. The camp was still in German hands. And 300 of Patton's best men were gone. When the news reached Patton, the old blood and guts didn't rage. He went quiet. He realized the magnitude of his mistake. He had let his heart overrule his head. But then the politician in him took over. He ordered the mission to be classified as a diversionary raid to confuse the enemy. He tried to bury the truth under a pile of paperwork. He told the press he didn't know his son-in-law was there. That was a lie. General Eisenhower eventually found out. He was furious. He reprimanded Patton, but the war was ending and Patton was a hero. The scandal was hushed up. John Waters survived the war and was liberated when the main army finally arrived weeks later. He went on to become a 4-star general himself. Captain Baum survived his wounds in the POW camp. Patton personally pinned a Distinguished Service Cross in Himian, perhaps out of guilt. But the 300 men? Most of them spent the rest of the war in captivity. Some never came home. They are the forgotten casualties of the ego trap. The Hammelburg Raid teaches us a brutal lesson about leadership and loyalty. A general's job is to spend lives to win wars, but he must never spend lives to serve himself. Patton fell into the oldest trap in history: hubris. He thought he was invincible. He thought he could bend the rules of war to suit his personal life. But war does not care about your family. War only cares about math. And on that day in March 1945, the math was deadly. Patton was a genius. He was a hero. But at Hammelburg, He was just a desperate father who made a fatal mistake. And 300 men paid the price. If this story shocked you, if it changed the way you see General Patton, make sure to hit that subscribe button for WW2 Survival. We don't just tell the hero stories, we tell the whole truth.